Welcome, everyone. My name is Gina Groen, Executive Director of the Northside North Shore Chamber of Commerce. I know most of you, but I know this recording will be sent out and viewed by a lot of people later. So introducing myself. For more than 125 years, the Northside Chamber of Commerce has served the Northside business community. We have 380 members, and our mission is to promote, connect, and support all of those members for the benefit of the whole North Side. A member of our team is always available to chat with you about what that means for your business and organization. And I won't get into it too much today because I want to get to our session. So this event today is part of a special series that we have coordinated with the Neighborhood Community Development Fund. They are our sponsor. And we're calling this series Business Builders, and 3 sessions. It's something that we do periodically as needed. And so this is the first session, focusing on working with Generation Z. And then next Thursday, same time, 2 p.m., we have a session on artificial intelligence, specifically Chat GPT in the workplace. And then the next Thursday on April 25th, our third session is on building a stronger team. So each of those sessions, including this one, will be recorded for later viewing. So make sure you register, even if you can't attend the live session. So before we jump into the content, I would like you to hear a few words from our sponsor, which, like I said, the Neighborhood Community Development Fund. And they do a bunch of work in the community with a lot of different small businesses. And I want to let them talk about how they can help you. So Danny Glover from the fund is here to talk briefly about what they do. So thanks, Danny.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I wish I was Danny Glover. That means I would be famous in acting. I'm Danny McGlory.
Oh my God.
Okay, at least you didn't call me Annie. I'll take Danny Glover any day.
All right.
So yes, well, we're happy to be here and to be a sponsor and support community development. As the Neighborhood Community Development Fund, formerly the Northside Community Development Fund, we branched into Allegheny County, I would say late 22. There's a need to help generate community development, improvement for all the individuals that are within low to moderate income areas to help build up generational wealth, help business owners start businesses, grow their business, technical assistance. We're here to make sure we support. So I am the newest, well, I was the newest member. But I am a loan officer. I joined the organization last year in January, and I was in Allegheny County as a loan officer, but I have been tasked with being the dedicated loan officer for the North Side. So if anyone is interested in seeking financing and your business is located in 15212, 214, or 233, you'll work with me. If you're not, that's okay, because we still have 3 other loan officers that are throughout Allegheny County that would love to help build business. So yeah, so we're definitely, I'm in the streets, on the streets, in businesses, making sure that everyone knows who I am. I'm working and getting around to the community. I've been a loan officer since November. So definitely have a lot of work to do since we have made such an impression and have been in the community for so many years. But it's great to have you guys here. You're here to learn, see what opportunities are available. And I just want to say, I know very little about Gen Z. I guess I'm a millennial, right? But I just know with Gen Zers, they think a little different when it comes to financing, but it's important to know that we're here to work with individuals who, from all walks of life, who have a great credit, who are building their credit, who are looking to start a business. They need help with maybe a business plan and sales projections and a location of where to have their business. And don't let me forget affordable housing. So we do offer affordable housing. If you're looking to, say, develop the community with affordable housing and the housing vouchers, we're definitely, that's what we do. And just to point out, we do have other community partners. We'll say number 1, Northside, North Shore. But we work with the Bloomfield Garfield Corporation, McKees Rocks, the Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Center, Hilltop, Wilkinsburg, partner with the Hill CDC, Riverside, the URA, and a Small Business Development Center. So we have a lot of resources and partners to help make a positive impact and grow communities and help you generate wealth. That's it for me.
All right, that's perfect. I'm still laughing at calling you Danny Glover. I don't know. Anyway, you guys do incredible work in the region, and it's pretty cool to sort of drive around and realize, knowing a lot of the projects that you're involved with, realizing all of the different businesses that have benefited over the years and have become important assets for the North Side. So with that, I am going to introduce my colleague, Quinn Kirby. Quinn is the coordinator of this session and is moderating the panel. Quinn's the Chamber's manager of strategic initiatives. And what that means is that they focus their time on the Chamber's many different projects within our Promote, Connect, Support framework. So that includes the Northside Workforce Development Program, marketing and tourism, networking events, and many other things. So Quinn, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, hi folks, thank you for being here. And thank you, Gina, for that introduction. Quickly, a couple notes about the session before we get into things. Please keep yourself on mute during the presentation. This will take about 35 to 40 minutes, and then there will be time for a Q&A session afterward. Please put any questions in the chat during the session or during the Q&A session, and I can bring that to the group. And you will receive a follow-up email after this event and the recording tomorrow afternoon. Takes a little time to buffer. This session is titled Business Builders Working with Gen Z. And to define Gen Z a little bit, because as a Gen Zer, I didn't know what Gen Z was defined by a couple weeks ago. But we're born between 1996 and 2010. We've been shaped by digitization, as Danny said, a shifting financial landscape, and of course, COVID-19. Our panel today consists of 4 folks in the Pittsburgh workforce with experience working as or with this generation. We hope this panel gives you some clarity on how to work with Generation Z in the workplace. So representing Zoomers, we have Emma Dawson, Director of Partnerships at Civic Champs, Rena Zhang, Strategy and Operations Manager at Avenue Workspaces at Innovate Pittsburgh, and Charles Mansfield, Community and Research Manager at Innovate Pittsburgh. Representing the management perspective, we have Leah Moore, Senior Director of Agency Operations at Pitpatone. So welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here. If we could just go down the line and take about a minute on your background of your role and one of the benefits you've noticed in working as Gen Z or with Gen Z.
Yeah, well, background at PGH, it's a non-private public-private partnership focused on making it easier to build and scale in Pittsburgh. Specifically working with the startup community and startup resources, bringing them together and making just it generally easier to build startups in Pittsburgh. What my role is connecting startups to resources, managing our databases, working on content communications, and supporting startups.
And then, so me and Charles are actually co-workers, so we both work at Innovate PGH. My role more so focuses on, our company operates several co-working spaces in the Oakland neighborhood that are geared towards startups that spin out of CMU and Pitt, student entrepreneurs, and just, people working at the hospitals. So my role focuses on managing those co-working spaces and helping them grow and thrive.
Yeah. And my name is Emma Dawson. It's nice to see all of you on Zoom land up there. I'm the Director of Partnerships at Civic Champs, which is a small tech startup based out of Indiana. I work remotely in Pittsburgh and connected to many of these folks here through Venture for America. It's a 2-year fellowship program that connects people to mid-sized cities. But particularly my role, I am more or less the generalist and operations person at Civic Champs, doing a lot in sales, and you name it. It's been a really, really fun journey. And to answer your question, I think one of my favorite things about working with Gen Z is just the energy that a lot of young people have just getting into the workforce. They're just excited to get in there and try different things. And it's been one of my favorite parts of working with other young people. So.
And I'm Leah Moore. I'm the Senior Director of Agency Operations at Pipitone. We're an integrated marketing agency here on the north side of Pittsburgh. I think obviously I'm not Gen Z, but I do have the pleasure of working with a large team of younger people who are coming out. I think the passion, that energy is one of the best things about the generation in general. Very dedicated to their crafts and their passions, and they bring that to everything they do, and that brings a great energy to a workplace. So I'm excited to be here to help guide the conversations.
Thank you. So 2 different buckets of conversation today. The first is on recruiting Gen Z talent. The second is on retaining Gen Z talent. So first, Gen Z folks, can you tell me a little bit about what benefits in the workplace draw you to an opportunity? So PTO, medical, flexible work schedule, remote. Obviously the list is not exhaustive, but as the inspiration hits, feel free to chime in.
For me personally, one of the big benefits that was really important was actually health insurance. I think that was especially prevalent on my mind when I was recruiting, because as Emma mentioned, we're all a part of like Venture for America. So a lot of the jobs that we were looking at were at startups. So there's a ton of startups that don't offer health insurance. And so I knew like that was a really important benefit for me, because I'm very familiar with like the costs of health insurance and medical care in the US. And then I would also say like a flexible work schedule. At Innovate PGH, like we have a lot of flexibility in our hours, to the point where like my manager actually allowed me to do a social media fellowship simultaneously with my job. So like a couple of days a week, I would be going to the POP district on the north side to do my fellowship, and then come back to work my, day-to-day job. And that like flexibility that offered was like a really like big, important benefit for me.
Okay, I'm hearing professional development opportunities as well.
Yes, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think the flexible work hours, like Rena said, is probably the thing that I didn't necessarily like look for it super hardcore when I was applying for positions right out of college. But now that I am in a role that allows me to like, choose where I'm gonna work, whether it's a coffee shop or a co-working space or my living room, or to have opportunities like this, to take an hour in an afternoon on a Thursday to come into a panel. I think, and I'll probably say this a couple of times, but having a supervisor who has an extreme amount of trust in me that I'll be able to get my work done, and values me in that way is really, really special. And so, yeah, I think the number one thing for me is flexibility and autonomy. And I'll definitely be looking for that as I continue my career forward.
Seconding on what Emma was just saying, the autonomy standpoint, right? The freedom just to be able to really go at projects that I'm passionate about within the scope of our work. I think that's a big plus for me with this role, as well as like both Rena and Emma were saying, flexibility. Flexibility from a, where I work standpoint. Like a lot of my work has just been going around networking, which is just my job, and going out to these different events, going out and seeing, meeting people. I'm so glad I get to do that. But that's only because of what my manager allows me to do. And then also with some remote flexibility there as well. It was very good.
And I think this is a good segue into talking about how Gen Z talent can work with managers and how that relationship can evolve. So Leah, can you tell me a little bit about what managing Gen Z has been like for you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing indeed you're going through, because I think that's all. I think that I desire for autonomy and networking, but I think from the management side, there's also this desire to understand what the people that are working for us and with us are doing, what they're aware of and what they're doing. So like on the counter side of that is, with that autonomy becomes a responsibility to communicate back, right? It can't just be, oh, I'm out doing my thing, like, but to be available to have those check-ins, to make the moment, to raise your hand and say, and I think
a lot of people are very good at that. Not everybody is. And so it's always an interesting dynamic, right, as you're working through, because I think with being autonomous, like that comes a lot of responsibility, right? That adds on top of that for communication back with your managers as you're looking at it. So it's always an interesting dynamic as you're going through, because you do have to earn that trust a little bit, right, as you're going through. I'm sure most of you found this. It wasn't just here, go do whatever. It was, you do this, well, then you get the opportunity to do something else. So I think that's something sometimes people forget a little bit, that you do have to earn a little bit of that and communicate back.
Yeah.
That responsibility falls both ways. So.
Right. I think, can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
I think it's super interesting that you talk about like Gen Z want the opportunity to like know all the pieces of the business, because I really think that's true for me. Like, and I think that is a characteristic of the Gen Z Zoomers, of like wanting to know your own personal social impact in your company. It's less like I'm gonna be the director of partnerships and stay in my lane. It's more like, what does like my customer success lead do, and like how can I support them and know like how our impact works together, and what does my CEO really do every single day? Like I'm really curious like what every person does, and like I want to know how we all together make a bigger impact. It's less of a like stay in my tunnel kind of thing. So anyway, I just wanted to add on to that. Like I think that's really, really true for my work. So
Anyone else have anything to add? Okay,
In the similar vein, communication preferences. We were raised in the digital landscape, and I know instant messaging is a huge deal. I get Slack messages all the time. Leah, Emma, Rena, Charles, have you seen any friction in multi-generational workspaces when it comes to communication? If so, how have you moved past that?
I think it's been interesting to see, because with that comes an expectation, like, so some of the younger people on my team will be like, I sent a Teams message to this person an hour ago and they didn't get back to me. And like, that's okay sometimes, right? Like there's this expectation of an immediate response. And like, I think what's interesting with us, because we're a hybrid workplace, is I do find that it takes a little while, but eventually our younger people, they will actually get up and come in and talk to you. Like when given the opportunity to talk in person, I think they realize it's faster and more effective and easier to get to the point. So it's always interesting to me to see, but I think there is this immediacy that comes with the Teams messaging that isn't all, or text message, and it isn't always as appropriate as it is. And there's like, need to sometimes a little patience, because to your point, that person's probably maybe in the middle of something, maybe in a meeting, maybe in the middle of their own project. And so it's always interesting to see that. So I think I think we've all adapted. I think even those of us that are older in the workforce are now more Teams and email focused than we were even 5 years ago. But it's just interesting to see like that there's just that expectation of immediacy that isn't always possible in the workplace. That it's always sort of a fun little dynamic.
From our experience, I think it depends on the person, right? Like me and Rena, sometimes we talk with our manager, we're the same person, and Rena's more on the, like I like having like daily meetings at a certain at a certain time frame. And I'm like I feel like half the time we don't really have as many updates, because just the nature of our projects are more like, maybe it's more of a week by week thing, and you'll have like real updates and real things to share. And that's just how like my brain works. I'm more of I'll write out my thoughts over time, and then now it helps me get in depth and think about like what are the different facets of an issue, and then how do we kind of solve it, or different facets of a project, and like what are we missing, right? Like I like that approach more versus a live kind of conversation, because I feel like I'll miss something versus like the other way. So I think it's a mix. It just depends on the makeup of your team and the types of projects you're working on, right? Some projects just need a faster, like we need to like talk about these specific 5 things every single day. Some aren't.
Yeah.
And so I think it just depends on the makeup.
So something that I'm hearing come up is a lot of it is just getting to know the individual.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Which makes a lot of sense. Every generation, just get to know the person that you're working with. But as first professional job out of college,
Yeah.
Same here. What were some challenges that you didn't necessarily foresee going into your role, and how have you overcome them?
For me, the role that I'm in is like very impacted by the circumstances that are going on. And so my job, like in the 9 months that I've been in it, has changed so much. And when I first got into my role, we had just opened a new co-working space and we were moving out of one of our old co-working spaces. So basically there was just like a ton going on. And at the same time, my manager was on parental leave. So my first month at my job was just incredibly challenging because I was dealing with like so many new things that were not what I had expected at all. Coming into the role, like I was dealing with a bunch of stuff that was not what was communicated to me during the interview process and the application process. And that has gotten so much better over time because I think the number one thing is I've communicated with my manager and I've developed like a really strong relationship with my manager where I'm able to provide him feedback and we're able to work together more to like navigate the changes and the chaos. So yeah, I would say in a role like mine where it's very ambiguous and ever changing, communication and developing like a good relationship with your manager were key things to help me through it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think mine's pretty similar. I feel like we have similar roles that like, not similar roles, but similar kind of processes in our startups that like my role has changed a lot in the last year and a half. And so I would agree with you. Like, I think the biggest thing for me that was a challenge in the beginning was like trying to set up those feedback loops, whether it's in person or whether it's like, you know, email, like whatever worked best for me and my supervisor. But then to know like really what was in my job title and then maybe what people were giving me that wasn't in my job title and like being able to set those boundaries and expectations. I know we talked a little bit about boundaries and how like Gen Z has like a little bit better of a grasp on saying like, you're not gonna text me after 5 p.m. and don't use my personal cell phone number, like that kind of stuff. I wasn't necessarily taught that, but it was something that really early on working for a small startup, like I had to like learn and like really journal and reflect on like, am I okay if my boss calls me over the weekend? Like, yes or no? Like, I need to be able to like have those kinds of answers so that when I go into my feedback sessions, I'm like super clear and super professional. And like, we've totally worked it out based on like communication, like you said. But yeah, I would say like those boundaries, working for like a really flexible job, like challenging at first, so.
I guess understanding that, you know, especially with, you know, your bosses, with the CEO, with C-suite, with people that are a lot more experienced than you, that they can also be, you know, they can also have a bad day, right? Like they can also, you know, have gotten waken up at like 2 a.m. because the baby starts crying and like they're just like tired or something. And so like if like they're not giving you like the energy or like they're like, you know, in a bad mood, that doesn't necessarily reflect on you, right?
Yeah.
In your performance.
That's a good point.
And your standing. And I think like kind of understanding that even if like, you know, they're like on a hierarchical pedestal, they're still just a person.
I think that's a very powerful thing to realize because it's just people too, and they have bad days. And sometimes it's not about you, right?
Yeah.
It's not, if they're short, it's not because you did something wrong. So don't ruminate on it and move on and do the next thing. That it is exactly that. Maybe they also had a pipe break in their house, right? Like different things happen as it goes through. I think that's a very powerful thing to be aware of.
It sounds like a lot of this is having a good relationship with management.
Yes.
And from a managerial perspective, Leah, what, in your experience, what have you done or what have you seen done that creates a good relationship between the folks you're working with and
I
admin?
think it's trying to find that balance between being available and giving people the autonomy, right? You want to be there when they have questions, but at the same time, you don't want to be a crutch, right? You want people to figure some things out on your own. It's okay that you don't know everything. It's okay that you have to ask some people around, and giving them that network that's around them, I think is very helpful. I think it's a fine line sometimes, right? Like I think you start to sometimes as a manager, I start to help people and I feel like if I overhelp, right? And then they're like, oh no, I can't do this because I have to ask you. And like, so finding that line is hard sometimes. It's especially interesting because like, I think your generation is so digitally native that you have all the answers at your fingertips. But at the same time, because you've always had all the answers at your fingertips, some of the older generations do a better job of researching and digging a little deeper and not just looking at the first 6 Google results, right? So it's really interesting in those dynamics that you're going through and how do you find that line and that balance with everybody. But I think the point is the whole generation isn't exactly the same, right? Even when you listen to how each of you answer your questions, you're 3 very unique people. So you adapt to the people that you're working with. And I think that goes both ways.
In a similar vein, I heard you mention something that I have noticed about us as a generation. That first 6 pop-ups in Google is so real. If it's not on the first page, I don't want it. I don't know if I want to say roadblocks, but have there been any concerns with working with Gen Z, either in your experience or that you've heard from other employers, so that these 3 folks can address them?
One of the area, I mean, I work with the digital marketing team, right, in general. So we're very familiar with search and how it works and all the pros and cons that are doing that. And it is an interesting challenge that we see a lot, that there isn't I don't know if it's a desire or a knowledge on how to dig deeper as it's going into that. It's like, obviously Google says this is the answer, so this is the answer. And like, I think turning on that inquisitiveness, right? Because the workplace isn't the same as school, right? It's not a paper, there's not necessarily one right answer. So I think it's always interesting. So I think from my perspective, like when you're presented with that problem, like how do you decide how deep to go and when to stop? And how do you decide when to ask for help because somebody else might have that knowledge, right? Because you do have all the answers, but maybe that person, your boss at the other end, they're like, all experiences is I've been there before and I've done it, right? And then I've made the mistake and I've learned from it. When do you stop and ask the question? And I think that's always interesting. So I think I challenge you guys to think about, when do you stop and ask for help and stop and just don't think you have the answer at your fingertips.
No, that's a great kind of point. It's definitely something that my boss and I have had huge discussions around, where I think in one way, starting a new job, my first like professional job, you try to be very professional, because I think there is a stereotype for Gen Z that we're unprofessional. We don't always come to the table like in the way that you said to you. But I think like with that, I haven't asked as many questions because I want to seem like more put together, but it's something that I've talked with my boss about, where he's
okay not to know things.
Exactly. And so my boss will be like, you can ask way more questions than you do. Like, you don't have to assume you know it, because it's like the thing you're leading. Like you can ask a lot more, and like we want to help you get there. So I understand that. Like, I think it's that balance of knowing that I am allowed to ask questions, but I also want to come off like I know what's going on. And so, yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I think kind of following up on what Emma just said, if it's a question on curiosity, or like the curiosity to like just like think deeper about things, I think that's a hiring question, right? More than anything else, right? It's like, are you passionate about this, right? Or is this just a thing that like you're doing? Because if you're passionate, you're gonna go deeper.
That's true.
But like from a kind of like, you're like really honing on like what Emma was saying, like from a comfortability asking questions specifically on like the execution, right? Like especially because we don't have so much experience. I think that's just a communication between manager and managee, and like expectations and like that complicated dynamic that we were touching on, more than anything else, right? It's like them being comfortable, saying it, them actually asking questions, and the manager making a comfortable space for them to do so.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
I think that's a good, again, another segue into professional development. Rena, you mentioned that you had the opportunity to get involved with the POP district. Warhol is a member of the Chamber of Commerce. And it was so cool to see like pictures of you and your team popping up in my social feed. Can you tell us a little bit about the value of professional development opportunities and Emma and Charles afterwards?
Yes, so, I think that I think this crosses generations, but especially with like the people that I know who are Gen Z, we are like, we have so many interests and so many hobbies and passions, and like oftentimes our jobs like don't cover all of them. And so for me, for example, like I'm really passionate about like content creation and video production, but I didn't necessarily want to like find a job focusing on that area. And my job doesn't really overlap with that interest. But I discovered like through a networking event, I found out about this fellowship program. And so my manager knew I had this interest. So I like sat down with him and had a conversation about if I would be able to do this. And we were able to work out an agreement. And so over the last 6 months, I've been able to balance like my 40-hour job with my fellowship program. And just like through communication with the manager, we've been able to work to allow me to have that space to do that. And I've been able to also bring in some of like the skills that I've learned through that fellowship program into my job more. For example, like me and Charles are working on building a community for young people interested in tech. So I help like create and edit a video for us, or I'll like help other people with their social media posts as well. So yeah, it's been cool like getting the opportunity to develop in an area that doesn't necessarily like overlap too much with my role, but also get the opportunity to use that in my role. So that's been like a huge like benefit of me working at Innovate.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, working for a small startup, like my company doesn't necessarily have the money to like take me to conferences or like go to other things. And so, and I knew that going into this. And so when I talked to my supervisor and said, you know, this is first job, like I'm still very interested in getting some sort of professional development. He asked me like what my career goals were, asked me what my strengths are and what I wanted to focus on in this job. And I told him I really wanted to focus on like public service facing kind of opportunities, like speaking, like things like this, or going and speaking at conferences, hosting webinars, those kinds of things. And so he like knew that. And then after about 6 months, like started transitioning me into doing that for the company. And so now I get to go to conferences and speak on behalf of my company. And I get to host things like this for my organization as well. And it's been a really cool opportunity. And so I think even if your organization doesn't necessarily have the funding to do more like flashy professional development, getting to know, like this is kind of the theme of this talk, but like really getting to know what, you know, your Gen Z employees want long-term, and trying to find opportunities at work for them to like talk about those experiences when they're interviewing for the next thing, like it's pivotal. And so I feel really grateful that my supervisor listened to me and has given me those opportunities to like travel and do that kind of work. So
I've also I've also gotten the opportunity to do a little bit of traveling, and it's been amazing. I got to go to South by Southwest in Austin, which is great. Kind of connecting with like external startup resources and the me's of like different cities and whatnot, which was amazing. And a lot of that was, you know, it was an important event, but my manager couldn't go. And so like I was next up, so like I got the chance to go. And so that was great. And I think kind of learnings I think are like, you know, kind of maybe getting creative about like the ways we see young people as an asset. Certainly as a network asset, right? Like you can only be so many places at once, right? One of the biggest reasons the manager hired me was because of the fact that, you know, he was having a kid. And so he wouldn't be able to go to all the events, he wouldn't be able to be at work once. And there's just so many places to be and so many places to go. So kind of that network development, coupling that with like the professional development, which they're kind of one and the same, and really empowering your people to like, oh, go to an event, you know, maybe, you know, we have we've been productive and we're not as busy this week. Let's slot out 2 hours, you all can go to that event, or something like that, something that's more simple and just getting people used to networking and expanding the network. I think that's a small way to support young people in the freshman development.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we go into the Q&A. I think we've touched on a couple things that make you feel valued in the workplace, management, professional development opportunities. Has there been anything that has happened particularly within your workplace that has made you feel like a valuable part of your team? Leah, feel free to chime in on this one as well.
It's very different from my perspective.
No, it's interesting when you look at it and go through, right? Because like, I think a lot of managers are trying to find those opportunities, and it's interesting that this was met with silence, right? Like even as you were going through and doing that. And so you have all these opportunities, but like, what do you feel part of the team? And I think in these remote work environments, and Em and I talked about this a little bit before we started, is I think I look at it and I think it would be a challenge, right? In some ways, because you don't have that same network of people to pull on that are outside of it. So it's just interesting to me that that was sort of a little bit of pause from all of you.
You know, I'm actually gonna reframe it a little bit.
Okay.
And Emma, to your point, something you mentioned earlier is something that is incredibly resonant with me, and Rena and Charles, knowing y'all a little bit, I think it probably resonates with you as well. That aspect of knowing that you're working towards something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
Instead of answering the question, what has made you feel like a valuable part of the team? What has made you feel like you're working towards something bigger than yourself?
I love working with student startups. It's my favorite thing ever. A large part of it is because I get to kind of support them in ways that are different from, people that have like gone through the process of building times, right? Like as like, knowing like all the people in the community and all the resources and like the landscape, it's just, I feel like I can offer them. And I feel like they're just like super passionate, excited about everything. And so like, I guess like that's like what makes me personally feel like, oh, like, wow, I like what I do. Like this is great. Like, it's so cool. Like when they figure something out or when they get through a hurdle, and it's just amazing.
So you're also passionate about working with Gen Z.
Yeah.
Rena?
I would say, wait, so your question was, what has made us feel, like what have we experienced in our roles that have made us feel like we're making a larger impact? My thought, like, my head goes to my manager, actually. I think I have a great manager. We have a great manager. And because this is actually something that I've struggled with in my role at times, because I think in my role, I have to do a lot of things that don't feel like they're working towards the larger picture, even though they are. Like, I think there's a lot of tasks I do that feel less impactful in the moment, but they're all leading up to something bigger. And I think that because I have a good relationship with my manager, like, we've been able to have conversations about that, and he's been able to help like reframe my perspective in the moments that I feel that way. And I think also just like hearing his perspective, like he kind of sees this larger view of my work, and just like hearing him talk about like how he views things has helped me a lot, like see the impact I'm actually making and see the larger picture of what we're working towards. So I think his impact has helped me like better understand the impact I'm making.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think kind of to the first question around value and also with impact. I think having really great, or not great, but like sustained systems of feedback as a team is super important for me. Just feeling heard, but then also to hear what other people are like, how they're really feeling. And so once a month, my team does a team talk where we would typically talk about like strategy or like a particular department. We take an hour to talk about what's going well with you, personally and professionally. What's something that you could improve on professionally? And then what's one thing that you think is going really well with the team? And then what's something that you could like want to see improve with the team? And then we shout one person out, and then the person that's shouted out gets to go next. And so we do this every single month. And so I think being able to have this like sustained effort of checking in on one another, not only on like what's going on personally, but like I love hearing what the other departmental leads think about the company as a whole, because they have very different perspectives than me. And so that is wonderful and something that like, no matter where I end up in my next jobs, like I want to bring that kind of systemic feedback loop with me. Because I think it's been so awesome to like hear other people and then hear people like take notes on what I think is important. Like I feel very valued because of that system in that process. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
We should come.
Leah, any input?
No.
All right, folks, we're gonna open it up to Q&A. Feel free to unmute or pop the question that you have into the chat. And if we don't have any questions, I've got a couple more. All right. Okay, so something that I feel is a little bit divisive with Gen Z is the idea of remote versus in-person and hybrid. I personally love working in the office. I need another person there to like body double. I don't know if I have ADHD or what, but it just helps to have a person grounding me as well.
Yeah.
I know, Emma, you're fully remote. Rena, Charles, I'm not sure what your experience is.
So I'm technically fully in person and I'm basically in person every day, but I still have flexibility and then,
I have more flexibility because her work is a lot more like focused on the co-working spaces. So
Yes.
it's really big in the nitty gritty. My work is more like, oh, like I might go to another co-working space like outside of us or like another event series or something like that where I'm out around the town. And so that might mean like 2 days in office, maybe 1 day I'm somewhere else, and then 2 remote or something like that.
Okay.
Some combination.
And Leah, how would that be defined? Is that hybrid? Is that?
I would call that hybrid.
Okay.
I think, I'm making this up a little bit, but I think in general, right, I think that fully in office is exactly that. That doesn't mean it comes without flexibility, right? That there's different things in that. And hybrid is some number, 2 to 3 days in the office and 2 to 3 days remote. I think that comes with varying levels of flexibility at different companies. Some companies you pick your days, some companies you can do what you want. And I think fully remote is pretty self-explanatory.
And do y'all have a preference? Are you enjoying the hybrid model? Would you prefer to be fully remote?
I would also challenge in, do you know if it's the only way you've ever worked? Like,
Yeah, that's true.
the fact that you're fully remote keep you from going to something that's hybrid next, or are you so like, because I don't, if it's your first job, that's the only way you know,
No,
right?
I think I'm so I'm fully remote. I think I'm very intimidated by fully in-person roles. It doesn't it's not something that I'm not going to do someday. Like I expect some point in my life, I'm gonna go in person, like 9 to 5 or something like that. But it's definitely something that I don't do like at all right now. Like I was telling Leah, like I can work at a co-working space, I can work in my living room, I can, work at a friend's house. Like, it's so neat that I get the opportunity to do that. Or like, if I have a meeting at 9:15, like I'm home and can wake up at 9 if I really want to, you know what I mean? And so I definitely think I am like a little intimidated by it. But all that to say, like, I definitely miss in-person connection. There's lots of pros to fully remote work, but it does not outweigh the chance to be in person and connecting with people. And so I definitely will be moving to another role at some point that allows me to have that experience. But yeah, I don't know. It's my first job and it's weird to be in a generation where your very first job could be entirely like internet based. It's like so bizarre. But still very grateful for it. Those are just a couple takeaways.
We have we have a question from Danny.
So I have a Gen Zer and he is his first job. He works for Apple and he's in customer service and he calls me a lot. and he'll vent and tell me, what he's going through. And I find myself when it comes to customer service or just how to work with management or other team players, how to coach. I seem like now my daughter is probably, what's that, a Gen Xer, Gen Zer? She's younger.
Alpha? Okay,
She
alpha.
was born in 98, so she's a little different. Like I don't have to have the same conversations with her that I do with the Gen Z.
That's
Um,
something.
Ask you, do you seek guidance? Do you go to your parents for to help you deal with certain situations that come up and how you relate to management or just handling different situations? Is that something that you do?
I'll say something very quickly, but I honestly call up my friends like a ton. I think especially, I mean, we're all in this cohort thing called Venture for America, but like I'll call Rena or like we've met up and
Yeah.
talked about like supervisor relationships. And like I think having that like intentionality with friends that are also like experiencing very similar things, like it's just so helpful. So I say honestly, like I talk to my supervisor. I would call my friends and then probably like call a parent if I need to. But I honestly go to friends that are in similar spaces, probably as like a first or second like pathway for that.
Same, I think it's those two and then nothing.
Yeah.
Honestly, I go to my parents all the time.
I was just gonna say, it's fascinating to me, the number of the young people on my team that'll be like, well, I was talking to my mom about this. Like, or I was talking to my dad and he said, because like my generation, I did, but I would have never said it in the workplace. Because it would have been like, you can't admit that you're talking to your mom and dad, that feels. But so it's an interesting dynamic. I do
Yeah.
think as a whole, I think it's a lot more common, I think, than
Yeah.
And I also don't want to discount the value of other professional mentorships and relationships. I consider myself grateful to have several people that I've met through my own network, whether it's through these folks here or my parents who are 20, 30 years older than me, who can give me advice on
Yeah.
managing multiple generations in the workforce. Cool. We have a question from Gray. What do the panelists think is a good amount of time to truly learn a job and be ready to move on to another position or receive a promotion? I'm gonna chime in and say, I don't know, because we've never done it before, but if you have a different opinion, please chime in.
I mean, I don't know. I think the economist, I study economics. So the economist me says, "Oh, you should always be looking." Like there's never a moment in which the pay disparity between people who like switch jobs every 2 years and people who don't is just it's massive. And so like in a lot of ways, I think people stay too long, especially once you get comfortable. And once you're like, oh, like I got this, like I know like everything I'm doing, like this is all like kind of pretty automatic, right? Once you hit that moment, I think that's a sign that you need to kind of expand your role and responsibilities and talk to your manager about that, as well as surveying the market, looking at like how your what your value is from a market standpoint, and making sure you're always getting fairly compensated for that knowledge. Yeah.
It kind of, I mean, this is like pretty hyper specific, but like I moved to Pittsburgh about a year and a half ago when I started my role, almost 2 years. And like it feels very similar if you were asked like how long could you stay in a new city? Cause like 1 year, like moving to Pittsburgh, like I was just getting like my feet on the ground, like getting a house, making friends, like knowing what I'm doing. And so I like after a year living in Pittsburgh, I was like, no way, I'm ready to leave Pittsburgh. Like I need to stay. And I feel like pretty similar about the job that I'm in. Like after a year, I kindly started to get my feet on the ground. And like now I'm into year 2 and I'm like, okay, like I think I know what I'm doing. And so like for me personally, like 2 to 3 years in this first job is like the minimum, I think, to really know what's going on and to like learn what it's like to be in a professional environment. But yeah, it's I guess a tricky question, I suppose.
All right, I think we have time for one more question from the audience, if anybody has one.
Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up here. Thank you everyone for your insights and your expertise. This has been great. And thank you all for attending. Danny with the Neighborhood Community Development Fund, thank you for sponsoring this. And for everyone in attendance, be sure to register for the next 2 virtual events. Next week's is on ChatGPT, AI in the workplace. And the 3rd event is on building a team, a strong team. Couple reminders for me to say here. Oh yeah, so in the follow-up email, you will receive information on the upcoming Northside Job Fair. We have as many tablers as we need, but we are still looking to get attendees, getting good folks into good jobs on the north side. You will receive the recording of this event in your email tomorrow. And you will also be receiving a survey. Please let us know what we did well and how we can improve. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next week at the same time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Woo.